and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Great Expectations. Chapter 9, A Visitor from Home. The next day, Herbert took time off from his job to take me to his father's house and introduce me. My father's hair was gray, but my tutor's hair was gray, but his face was youthful. His smile and natural manner were very much like Herbert's. I liked him at once. I was to receive my lessons with 2 other students with whom I met. Startop was friendly and good-natured, but Bentley Drummel and I disliked one another on sight. I later found that Drummel disliked most everyone because he considered himself to be too good for ordinary company. He was related to the aristocracy, but his manner was sulky and rude. As I reported to Herbert, Drummel reminded me of a large spider and was just about as pleasant. Mr. Pocket began at once on my education, which extended to famous sites and places I must visit in London. One day, as I was looking around my rather depressing rooms at Bernard's Inn, I realized that they didn't have to look as they did. I resolved to surprise Herbert by buying new furniture, rugs, and curtains. When I told Mr. Jaggers of my plan, he laughed. I knew it would take no time at all before you'd catch on to city life. How much? As I was considering the sum, Mr. Jaggers' housekeeper arrived with a hot lunch for him. She was a tall woman, about 40 years old, with large faded eyes. She did not seem entirely normal. She kept her eyes on Mr. Jaggers in a pleading way. Yet I could see the lunch was a fine one. I finally named a sum, and Mr. Jaggers called Mr. Wemmick and instructed him to count it out for me. Herbert was delighted with the splendid appearance of our rooms and shook my hand several times a day for the next week to express the pleasure he took in them. The decoration was no sooner finished than I learned I was able to have a visitor, one who would be able to distinguish between my oriental rug and the ugly carpet in my sister's parlor. Biddy had written that Joe was set out on visiting me, and my return letter confirmed the day. In truth, I didn't want to see him. If I could have paid the dear man to stay away, I would have done so. But how could I tell him that I was no longer the Pip he had once known? On the appointed day, I heard him clumping up the stairs. When I reached the door, I thought he would never finish wiping his feet. I was about to lift bodily off the mat, but at last he came in. With his face all aglow, he sneezed both my hands and worked them and straight up and down if I were some new kind of pump. I offered to take his hat, which I saw was new, but Joe kept a hold of it as if it were precious. His eyes rolled around and around the room and around the flower powder in my dressing gown. Joe was almost tongue-tied, and I was glad when Herbert came in, followed by the waiter who had set out a meal. Before we sat down at the table, Joe was forced to give up his hat. He placed it on the corner of the mantel above the fireplace from which it fell at intervals. "Will you have coffee or tea, Mr. Gargery?" asked Herbert, ready to pour out either. "Thank you, sir," replied Joe, stiff from head to foot. "I'll take whichever is most agreeable to yourself." "Would you say coffee, then?" "Thank you, sir," said Joe, looking a little unhappy. "Since you are kind to make a choice of coffee, I will not go contrary to your opinion. But don't you ever find it heat one up a bit?" "It shall be tea, then," said Herbert, and he poured it out. Here's Joe's hat tumbling off the mantel. He leaned to pick it up and returned it to the exact same spot. As he ate, Joe fell into an unaccountable fits of meditation with his fork midway between his plate and his mouth. He coughed strangely, and he sat so far from the table that he dropped more food than he ate. I was very glad when Herbert left us. Of course, it was all my fault. If I had been more relaxed with Joe, he would have been more relaxed with me. "Us two being alone now, sir," he began. "Please, Joe," I interrupted almost angrily. "How can you call me sir?" He looked down and began again. "I was wrong to come here, Pip. I was wrong to come in these clothes. I belong to the Ford and on the marshes. I know I'm awful dull, but if you ever want to see the old Joe, you would come and put your head in the old Ford window like you used to. Now goodbye, dear old Pip. God bless you. God bless you." For several weeks afterward, I was full of shame at myself for over dear Joe's visit. This was intensified still further when I received the news that my sister had died. At this, I felt only a kind of relief. It wasn't until years later, when I was 20, that I received good news from my past. This came through Mr. Jaggers, and it was glorious. It was from Estella, who had just returned from France. She was coming to live in London, and she invited me to call upon her. That's the end of that chapter. I will see you later.